Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar part 3 of a part 6 series, Positive Behavior Supports, featuring Kevin Fitzgerald. My name is Carlin. I'm from Behavior Development Solutions. I'm sitting in for our usual webinar host, Marissa, today, but I hope you'll find that I will provide the same experience here. As you may be aware, as I said earlier, this is a part 3 of a 6-part series, and you are still able to purchase parts 4, 5, and 6 on our website. I'll post a link in the chat feature after I finish my introduction today. And I just wanted you to be aware that you can still purchase CEUs for today's event as well. If you haven't already, they're also available during or after the webinar today if you're interested in obtaining that CEU credit. As you may know from attending previous webinars with VDS, there will be a series of poll questions that you'll be asked to answer throughout the presentation. You can answer them right on your computer screen here, and we will that will give us the proof of your attendance today. So if you did purchase CEUs, we will use the poll answers to determine your eligibility. That and your attendance in today's webinar will count towards the CEU eligibility, which will be reviewed after the webinar. We will email you further instructions within 2 business days of our webinar today with how you can go about obtaining that CEU credit after you sit through the webinar today. And of course, if you have any issues answering those poll questions, feel free to put them in a Word document or an email and just shoot us an email after the webinar as well so that we know to count your poll answers towards your eligibility for today's webinar. Additionally, your accuracy on the poll question answers are not what we're looking for. We're not grading you. We're just kind of trying to make sure you're here, you're paying attention, and you haven't, kind of turned us on mute and gone out to walk your dog or anything like that. So please just try to answer all of the questions as you can to the best of your ability. If you have questions for the presenter today or for myself, please feel free to use that question interface right in your GoToWebinar control panel. Type those questions and send them over. I will receive them, and we will have a short period of time towards the end of the webinar for questions and answers, although we may have some time in between here and there to answer a few as they come up, but just keep them coming, and I will keep track of them, and we'll go through them towards the end. Today's webinar is scheduled to go until 2:30 p.m. At the 2:30 time frame, you will be able to leave if you have to get on to something further, but if we are able to go over or we have additional questions that we haven't yet answered, we will stay and continue to answer those questions for as long as we can. So yeah, if there's any issues with audio or visual or anything that you want to ask Kevin today, please feel free to use that questions interface. We did not send out the handouts prior to the webinar today, but they are available. The PowerPoint presentation is available within the control panel in that GoToWebinar feature under handouts. And I believe that is all I have. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Kevin Fitzgerald for our wonderful presentation today.
Well, we don't know if it's wonderful. I haven't done it yet. I'm hoping it's going to be wonderful.
I have faith.
Thank you. I just want to say again how humbled and honored I am to be here with you today. I know that I'm getting a little bit of a following. It's not getting to my head that a few of you have attended all the webinars and plan on attending the entire series because you work with adults with developmental disabilities, just like I do and have dedicated my life to. And Positive Behavior Supports, PBS, is such a great foundation, I believe. This is pretty simple stuff, so I don't know, a lot of you may have heard some of these principles and practices articulated before, but I always believe it's good to go back to the core principles of PBS. A lot of what we're going to cover today is information that I actually do when I train direct care support staff. I think so much of PBS, Positive Behavior Supports, that if you look at my logo, when I started my company 2 years ago, Premier Behavioral Solutions, when I was trying to think of a name, I had to come up with something that actually had the initials PBS in it. So that was kind of like the evolution of my company's name. So that should tell you how much I truly believe in the philosophies and principles of PBS. So without further ado, let's get into it. So part of what we talk about is universal strategies of positive behavior supports. And it's universal, as I'm saying here in the first slide, the first point. These are strategies that are in effect for all people in all places at all times, hence the term universal. These strategies that we're going to talk about today are not just implemented for persons with intellectual or developmental disabilities. These strategies will enhance your relationship with your significant others, your children, your siblings, your coworkers, etc. So everything that we talk about today, generally speaking, is about the right way to treat people, the right way to reinforce people, the right way to motivate people. And we should be doing that with all people, not just the people that we're privileged to work with in each and every day that might have a disability. In its most simple and basic view, universal positive behavior supports is essentially treating others like you would like to be treated, interacting with others and providing opportunities that you would like for yourself. Positive behavior supports focuses on the prevention. So one of the main components of PBS, those of us that have been in the field forever, like me, 35 years, but who's counting? Back in the day, the vast majority of our energy was focused on, after people have a major behavioral problem or issue, how do we contain the situation? How do we react or respond to the situation? How do we try to calm down the situation? Very much reactive response based historically. And one of the beauties of positive behavior supports, in my opinion, is that it shifts that focus of attention almost exclusively on preventing problem behaviors from occurring. And how do we do that? In the recognition of antecedents and setting events and precursors. So this is why I believe so strongly in PBS, is because I think our goal as clinicians and behavior analysts, or whatever your background is, should always be to try to focus on people from having problems in the beginning, before things happen. And so PBS has kind of shifted the emphasis from a reactive response-based to a prevention proactive kind of focus, which I think is fantastic and really where we should be. I'm going to quickly, not to give right short shrift. These are, I live in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts has been advocating PBS for people with disabilities for about 8 or 9 years now. So when they came out with new regulations last year, PBS regulations for all private providers to embrace, really haven't actually implemented them yet, but in spirit they're there. The pandemic had a lot to do with that. They kind of focused on some basic rights that people have that we should never forget. And I just want to remind you of what they are now. Again, the pandemic over the last year has affected a lot of these fundamental basic rights, as you'll see when we get into them. But all supported persons have the right to their personal possessions. Don't touch without permission. That's in there because, as I said, a lot of what I'm talking about today is training that I do with direct support professionals. People have a right to self-determination and freedom of choice. All persons are presumed competent unless a court determination indicates otherwise. So we know that people are their own guardian unless someone has questioned their capacity to be their own guardian, make true informed decisions, and then gone through the court process, which is usually a probate court process, to question that or get someone appointed to help them make decisions if they need assistance. Individuals have access to leisure activities and community experience, which the person desires and enjoys. Again, pandemic be damned, that severely impacted a lot of this, but looks like things are starting to emerge once again. Privacy and freedom of movement, right to phone and internet access, right to receive and send mail. Now, a lot of these, you may say, well, Kev, why are we going over this? Because I'm going to tell you something. Those of us that work in the field, a lot of these rights are violated to a certain degree because people have made a determination the person can't exercise these rights appropriately. And sometimes they don't necessarily go through the proper procedures, committees, and channels to infringe some of these rights, and that troubles me. So again, I want to remind us, let's get back to the basics here. A right to have visitors. Again, not so much during the pandemic, but certainly things are beginning to change. Right to their own money and how they choose to spend it. This is one that a lot of people struggle with. People have the right to decline services and supports. We may not like it when they do, or we may not think it's a good decision, but they have the right to make that decision. Sometimes individuals we support can and will make bad choices, just like we do. All of us, none of us are above reproach. We've all made bad decisions and bad choices at some point in our lives. We don't have to get personal about it, but the people that we support will sometimes make bad choices as well. Where we come in is this last point. We have a responsibility to try to educate our individuals to make good choices and counsel them on the consequences of making choices that may be potentially harmful. That could involve smoking. It could involve things like not wanting to eat properly. It could be a lot of things. People have the right to refuse medications. Well, that can be a real problem if the medications like anticonvulsants are absolutely necessary to prevent seizures. So again, this is where we have to be sensitive to the fact that people have the right to make what we consider to be bad or unhealthy choices. But our job is to counsel them and move them in a direction of making better choices, just like we do for ourselves. One of the main components of PBS that I really like pretty much above everything else is that it tends to view persons from a perspective of strength as opposed to weakness. This is interesting because if you look at the history of people with what we used to call mental retardation, by definition, they had problems, they had limitations, they had deficits, they had handicaps. And we tended to focus on that as the defining core of who they are. And that's really very unfortunate and a terrible way to view anybody. So what PBS tends to do is look at the strengths, the qualities, the abilities that a person has, and then attempt to expand on them, rather as immediately identifying people based on their deficits or their limitations. When you start to do this, and I meet a lot of people in my practice, and I get to meet new people all the time, and it's thrilling, and I never get tired of it. Whenever I meet someone for the first time, I always immediately focus on, oh, they got a great sense of humor, they're very intelligent, they can communicate very well, so I focus on the positive attributes that a person has and not so much on the weaknesses or the deficits. So basically here, focus on what a person can do, not what they can't do. It's an interesting thought. So let's minimize. I'm not naive, neither are you. We know that a lot of the people that we support can't do certain things, but let's make sure that the things they can't do, they've at least had an opportunity to attempt to do. Let's not have them not be able to do things because they've never had the opportunity. That would be a shame. Find the special skills and abilities that a person has and help them to improve or refine them, or maybe even help them discover them. So an example I give when I'm doing some of this training to staff, and again, this is a condensed version of PBS training. The actual training I do for staff is 3 hours, so it's much more comprehensive. But I meet a lot of people that say, I like to cook, and I go, what do you cook? And they go, well, I can cook popcorn in the microwave oven. And I go, that's fantastic. You push the buttons, you know how much time to set? Yeah. But no one has ever taken that skill and actually tried to expand on it or go from a microwave to a more traditional kind of food preparation because they're either afraid or they don't think the person is capable of doing it, or I'm not so sure what. But when I hear that people have these interests, I then try to challenge them to expand on them and become more proficient, because I think that's what we all try to do with the skills that we have. Changing your vocabulary will change your thought process. Try to eliminate words and concepts like handicap, limitation, deficit, impairment, and even disability. I mean, right now we use the term developmental or intellectual disability, and those of us that have been around a while, in a couple of years, I can absolutely assure you, it'll be something else. That terminology will be archaic, and something else will have taken its place. That tends to be how the field works. And that's good. That's expanding, that's evolution. This is a key point I make with a lot of staff, because a lot of staff are guilty of doing this, as are we. Do not project your personal perceptions of a person's limitations onto that person. I can't tell you, again, having done this for 35 years and I ain't stopping anytime soon, I can't tell you how many times I've met staff and I'll meet an individual and I'll kind of assess them and observe them and get to know them a little bit. And I'll say something to the staff about like, hey, can Joe how does Joe do his laundry? And they'll immediately say, oh, he can't do his own laundry. We have to do his laundry for him, which immediately prompts me to say, well, why? He can't do that. He would never be able to measure the detergent. He wouldn't be able to lift his clothes up above to put them in the washing machine. So when I get that kind of perspective, and I get it a lot, that's dangerous potentially, because we might be preventing from that person doing something that they might in fact be capable of doing. And we should be encouraging people to do as much as they can for themselves as possible. All people are capable of growth, improvement, advancement, and refinement, in spite of what difficulties they may have been born with or acquired at some point during their life. Everybody can do better. My experience is, regardless of a person's disability, cognitive, medical, physical, everybody can do better. And I don't think it's delusional to make that statement. I think it's based on reality. It's based on a lot of experience and opportunities. And if we believe that people can do better than what they're currently doing, then they will begin to believe it. And that will motivate them to make the effort to do better. So again, don't project personal perceptions of a person's limitations onto that person, because you're essentially holding them back. And that's really not something we want to be a part of. Having said that, we can go to poll question 1.
Okay, ready to launch first poll question. According to PBS, we should make a sincere effort to change the labels with which we refer to supported persons. Select one of the following: true or false. And this is what the poll questions will look like. If you hadn't had a chance to attend a webinar with us before, if you can answer right on your computer screen there. And if you are having any difficulties with using the GoToWebinar interface, you can certainly keep track of the answers to your poll questions and submit them via email or put them in a Word document. I will post the email in the chat feature, but it is support@behaviordevelopmentsolutions.com. If you are having any issues with answering those poll questions and you need to submit them separately after the webinar today. Looks like everybody is doing a pretty good job of getting their answers submitted. So I am actually going to go ahead and close this out in a couple seconds here. If you haven't had a chance to answer the question, please do so.
Better be 100%. Don't tell me if it isn't.
All right, I'm closing this out here in the interest of time, Kevin. One second. And it looks like 99% said true and 1% said false. So we're very close.
All right. I guess we'll have to take that. Yeah, as I just stated, we really want to try to eliminate those. I'm so old. I'm so old that I remember back in the day when I took my first psychology class. I think in a book it said label jars, not people. That's how old I am. So, and I think that thought process and that philosophy still holds true to this day. So the goal of PBS, as it should be, is help people be as independent. Oh, let me just back up for a second. Are there any burning questions on the docket right now that people have submitted, or while we have a minute?
I have two questions, or a question and a comment. I don't see if they're dire or not, but first question is from Allison. What is your opinion about food and limiting intake?
Most people are on a doctor's ordered diet. That has to do with, the amount of caloric intake that in food groups that they should eat from. Food is a big issue for lots of us. We all like to eat, So do the people we support. And for a lot of the people we support, the number one gratification that they get in their life is food and drinks. So when you start playing with that and withholding or not allowing, you got to be real careful. Generally speaking, you know, our job, I believe, is to encourage people to eat healthy, to eat the proper amounts of food. Obviously, many people have consistency issues. Food has to be prepared to proper consistencies. But there are going to be some people, you know them and I know them, that are going to say, thank you very much. I know what the menu is. I know what I'm supposed to eat. I know how much I'm supposed to eat, but I'm not doing that. I'm going out to McDonald's and I'm going to eat 3 Big Macs. And I'm sorry if you don't like it, but that's what I'm going to do. So that can be a problem because we have to try to counsel the person on why they probably shouldn't do that. But be careful whenever you're involved with the food or fluid intakes and restrictions and that kind of stuff. What was the comment, Carlin?
Well, actually, there was a question at the end. Sean says, while I agree with the rights you outlined, I just want to get your thoughts on how we navigate some of these when there are safety and other concerns. For example, I had a client with capacity who was adamant on buying a chainsaw, or another client who would give away their money, and then they had to do without. Are there any circumstances where we can't uphold these rights?
Well, I mean, you know, we all have rights, but you know, for those of you that didn't attend the human rights webinar last month, we really got into this, the minutia of this. You know, the word right is always followed to me by the word responsibility. You don't have one without the other. We have rights, but we got to exercise our rights responsibly, right? So, you know, I'm not exactly sure if I would encourage someone to run out and get a chainsaw because I don't know if the guy's lifelong ambition was to cut up trees or whatever, but you know, that's a very, very dangerous piece of equipment. People that are able-bodied and capable of cut off limbs and had major injuries. So I would just caution you whenever we use the term. Let me quickly tell you, I work with a lot of people with developmental disabilities that are sexual deviants, many of whom are sex offenders. So when it comes to phone and internet access, do you not think that I have supervision in place? I have blocks in place. I have parameters in place. You're darn right I do. So again, those are the basic kind of generic rights, but there's wiggle room in each of them based on individual differences and individual clinical issues and needs. Okay, let's get back to the slide. Most people, as I said, would like to do as much for themselves as they possibly can. Always provide the person. This is a key point because a lot of us we're guilty of number 2. Always provide the person with a reasonable opportunity to complete or at least initiate the task or activity before you step in. I can't tell you how many, literally hundreds of times in my career, I've seen staff doing something for a person that the person might be able to do on their own if they were giving ample time. Key, you got to have patience to be successful in this field. Patience and persistence. So, you know, I've walked in on people that maybe were trying to brush their teeth and we're doing a pretty inadequate job, marginally brushing their teeth, staying in one location, maybe no toothpaste on the brush. And, you know, what I oftentimes will see, using that as an example, is the staff go in, they see that the person isn't even close to brushing their teeth properly, so the staff immediately take over. Usually it's because the staff are rushed, people are rushed. This happens a lot in the morning when people are to be picked up for day programs or staff need to be leaving for day programs, and there's a lot of pressure. So part of PBS is all about looking at a person's daily routine. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then trying to have them adjust the routine in a manner that works best for that person. Why do they always have to fit into the routine that we impose on them? I don't think they should have to. We should be providing supports based on what's in that person's best interests. Maybe a person needs 10 minutes to be able to go through the toothbrushing procedure adequately with staff assistance. But many times staff will move in, start brushing the person's teeth, get it done quickly, thoroughly, and they're done. But the person will never learn how to do that if we don't give them the chance and show a little patience and persistence and do some teaching. So that continues to be a problem in my eyes. Which leads me to the next bullet point. You're there to provide assistance. And I just alluded to this kind of phraseology. Think in terms of doing with a person as opposed to doing for a person. Big difference. I'm doing something with you. That's great. That's teaching. That's providing reasonable support. That's moving the person towards being as independent and autonomous as possible. Doing for a person is not. Big difference between the two. Try to differentiate if a person is not doing something because they lack motivation or because they cannot do something based on their physical disability. In other words, try to make the distinction between a person who won't do something. Again, key distinction. And these are always the basic phrases and principles I go back to when I find I'm deviating and getting lost in the ozone somewhere. I always come back to PBS. I come back to simplicity. I come back to basic fundamental principles when I start to lose my way. And it usually grounds me and helps me see things more clearly. So one of the big distinctions with the people I work with, are they not doing something because they can't do it, or are they not doing something because they won't do it? Big difference. Someone who's in a wheelchair that I'm encouraging to walk who simply can't walk, that's stupid. But there's many people in wheelchairs, as a side note, probably don't need to be. That's a discussion for another day. So, but a person that says, if I say, hey, Joe, can you bring your hamper down to the washing machine? And he refuses to do it, but he's physically capable of doing it, well, that's a won't issue. That's a motivation issue. That's a reinforcement issue, right? Because he can do it, he just doesn't want to do it. Well, I can relate to that. There's lots of things I don't want to do. I think we all can. So from a PBS perspective, our job is to assist people in being as independent and doing as much for themselves as they possibly can. Poll question number 2.
Okay, poll question number 2. Here we go. Making a determination regarding what an individual won't do versus what a person can't do is an extremely important distinction. Select true or false.
I have a prediction to make, Carlin. One of these questions, we're going to get 100%.
All right, I like that.
I have a feeling this could be the one.
It could be this one, huh? All right, well, everybody, please get your answers submitted as quickly as possible so that we can close this out and continue with the presentation. Well, I'm not going to reveal until I do the grand reveal at the end here. All right, I'm going to close this out, everybody. So if you could get your last second submissions in. And here we go.
Please.
100% true.
Yes.
Nobody said false.
I thought someone would say false just so we wouldn't get 100%. I appreciate that, everybody. I really do. All right, I've harped on this in some of my other webinars, and I'm never going to stop because this is the deal breaker. How effectively does the person communicate? Isn't it really all about communication when you all boil it down? Yeah, it is. If people can't communicate, they communicate via their behavior. How does the person communicate, and how effective and understandable is it? If the person struggles with expressive communication, as many of our folks do, what have we done to attempt to rectify or ameliorate the situation? One of the biggest problems I have, one of the biggest struggles I have, and one of the things that bothers me more than anything else in the field is when I meet people, and I meet a lot of people, and I see right off the bat that their expressive communication is unbelievably limited. Verbal, forget it. Pointing, gestures, meaningful, sign language, not there. When I see someone who's that primitive, and I'm not using the term in a detrimental way, who's that primitive in their communication style, it upsets me because I know that everybody can learn to communicate better. everybody, regardless of their functioning level, regardless of their mental, physical, cognitive disabilities, everybody can learn to communicate better. I've never met a person that I can't say that that applies to. But oftentimes I see people have accepted the fact that they can't communicate, and they just, it's like, oh, well, he can't communicate. So what does that mean? You're communicating for him? Your speculation and conjecture about what he can, what, that doesn't work for me. That's not empowering the person. In fact, quite the opposite. So this is something that I never, I'm like a pit bull when it comes to communication. I never let this go. 95% of all behavior, good and bad, serves a communicative function. We know this. We all know this. Assisting a person in developing more appropriate and effective expressive communication skills and abilities is one of the most overlooked and neglected areas in our entire field, and we must do something about it. It is not okay that this continues. It's not okay. It's not okay because it's a deal breaker. It affects everything. If I can't communicate, boy, that limits so much in so many different areas, in so many profound ways, that we really have to work on that diligently. And I've worked with some people, and you know, if there's any speech language pathologists involved in the webinar today, please don't take offense when I say this. But the best ideas about how to help our people communicate usually come from ourselves and the staff that work with our people, because nobody knows them better than we do. Nobody. So I'm not going to bring in a speech language pathologist that has little experience in dealing with intellectually disabled adults to help me necessarily figure out. I'm going to throw out some ideas as to how I think that person might be able to be taught, or something that might motivate that person on a very fundamental, simplistic way. I've used cards. I had one individual many years ago back in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'll never forget the guy. His name was Cliff. Very cool guy. Didn't have any expressive communication skills at all. Nobody knew what to do. So through a lot of teaching and discrimination, I basically taught him that green was when I'd take him out in the community, he would have lots of problems. And I think he started to have problems because he wanted the activity to end. Okay, and that was how he communicated. It took me a while to figure out, longer than it probably should have, but eventually I got there. So over time, I'm not going to say it's happened in weeks, took several months. I knew Clifford knew his colors. I gave him a red card and a green card. He also liked to wear shirts with pockets. So red and green. Green, over time, and I can't go into detail about how I did the training, but maybe another day. I taught him over time the green meant he was good. Whatever activity was going on, he was fine with it. So periodically when I take him out, Cliff, how you doing? He'd reach for the green card. Again, this didn't happen overnight. And I also knew that when we were out in the community and he reached for that red card, that meant he wanted the activity to end. And I'd also learned very painfully that if the activity didn't end very quickly after Cliff wanted it to end, he was going to figure out a way to make that activity end. And he was real good at it. So I won't go into detail about what he did, but it was very effective. So again, sometimes it's that basic, it's that fundamental. But how important is that even in that example I just gave you, which is a couple of decades old, that empowers the person to let you know how they're doing. And that is so powerful and so profound. We can never miss that point, and we can never stop giving credence to how incredibly important that is. So when I see people that can't communicate or communicate so ineffectively, we must help them do better. It's our job. Remember, virtually all supported persons have much more refined receptive language than expressive language. We all know this. Just because they can't speak doesn't mean they don't understand. So again, most people, including ourselves, usually have more well-developed receptive language. We understand, but we may not be able to articulate it quite the same way it came to us. Always treat individuals with dignity and respect. Again, remember that a lot of what I'm going over today, I use with direct care staff PBS training. But I think we can all benefit from reminding ourselves of these basic principles. never talk down. You know, guys, one of the dirty little secrets out there in the field is abuse and neglect is up dramatically over the last year. There's lots of reasons for it. Psychological abuse, verbal abuse, neglect. Staff are stretched out to the max. They're putting in tremendous amounts of overtime. Virtually every agency is short-staffed. We all know this. We put our folks in a real tough spot over the last year. And when things get that volatile, abuse and neglect, unfortunately, tends to be a side effect of that. But we should never talk down to supported persons, interact with all persons in a manner like you yourself would want and expect to be treated. Obviously, never yell or scream, use profanity, threaten to do something to someone if they do not comply, etc. I still periodically walk into situations where staff says, you know, if you don't turn that radio down, I'm going to take it out of your room. And I immediately object and I go, no, you're not. You know, let's talk about getting them some headphones. Let's talk about doing something else, but don't threaten the person with removing an item that they purchased and they own because you don't have any right to take it. Never talk, this is a common one, never talk or interact with supported persons as though they are children. Avoid the parent-child paradigm. So when I see staff starting to act like they're a parent and they start treating our adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities like they're kind of like a child, that's the beginning of a bad situation. Never goes well. And I remind direct care staff that if they have young children at home, minor children, they can impose certain things, they can dictate certain things, but they can't carry that mentality over to the work setting when they're supporting our folks that are adults with developmental disabilities. The main role of a staff person is to act as a teacher. This is another thing I believe to the absolute core of my being. When I talk to direct care staff and I ask them what their title is, you know, they say direct support staff, direct support professional. They come up with 5 or 6 different examples of what they perceive their job title to be. And I correct them and I go, no, you're all teachers. You may not be certified as teachers in the traditional sense, but that's what you are. And I begin to explain to them why I think that. And they tend to agree with me. Opportunities to teach people skills, even those that are not formally identified, are all around us. Embrace them. Opportunities to teach people are there all the time. And we need to be aware that those opportunities are there. It doesn't have to be on a formal plan, doesn't have to be a formal goal or objective. It's, hey, I'm out here in the kitchen. Can you give me a hand? I need someone to stir the salad. Those kinds of opportunities to teach can be more motivating, more reinforcing for the folks we support than anything else. Depending upon a person's awareness, sensory limitations, and/or level of cognitive disability, explain to that person what you were doing or going to be doing prior to initiating the activity so they are aware of your intention. I once had an individual in a residence that would get shots several times a day. I don't remember if they were diabetic or whatever. And the staff would, the person was blind and had some severe hearing impairment. And you know how they began to realize when they were going to get the shot, which they tended to have an aversion to? When the needle was jabbed in their arm. That doesn't go so well, folks. So always let people know what your intention is so that they're aware of what's taking place and why it's taking place to the best of their ability. Remember, always interact with supported persons like they are your boss or supervisor, because they are. If it weren't for the privilege, and I mean this so sincerely, if it weren't for the privilege of providing supports and services to persons with developmental disabilities, none of us would have jobs. So when I sense that a staff person has a real attitude problem and they're starting to treat people in a manner that doesn't make me uncomfortable, I'll pull them aside and go, you know what? If it weren't for Joe over there, you wouldn't have a job. And they're like, what do you mean? And I say, well, they're funded by the state or the federal government. That's where the money comes from. And if they didn't need support, you wouldn't be here. And sometimes they go, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, well, maybe you should. Not a bad idea. Positive reinforcement has tremendous power. We all know this. We've all done the behavior analytic coursework. We know that nothing trumps positive reinforcement. I don't believe anything does. So let's talk about that a little bit, because we don't do it enough. When an individual is behaving appropriately, responsibly, acceptably, provide ample amounts of verbal praise in the form of acknowledgement, recognition, and appreciation. How simple is that? Why don't we do it more? I've never been given a plausible answer to that question. Why don't we do it more? Why are we afraid to tell people how good they are, or how valued they are, or how much we appreciate them? What stops us? I don't know the answer to that question. And if any of you do, I'd love to know what it is, because I haven't figured it out. Very simply, we must attend and respond to individuals more often when they are doing the things we want them to do versus those times when they are doing things we would prefer they not be doing. Again, I told you some of this stuff was going to be simple and back to basics, and this is a good example of that. Think of the mistakes that many of us made as parents when raising our children. I don't know about you, but when I raised my two sons, I have identical twins who are now 34 years old. I made a ton of mistakes. If I could do it all over again, I'd do it differently. I paid a lot of attention to them when they were doing things they shouldn't be doing. And God knows they did a lot of that. And I didn't pay as much attention to them when they were doing all the things that I kind of in retrospect took for granted. And I try to make sure I don't make that same mistake with the people we support, or our staff for that matter. Praise, positive recognition, and acknowledgement are the most powerful reinforcers available to us. We know this through the research. Nothing trumps this. People want more money, but more than money, people want praise, positive recognition, and acknowledgement. That's number one. What have we put in place to positively reinforce, recognize, and appreciate the staff? Boy, is this a problem in the field. Many agencies that I have been involved with and continue to be involved with do not put enough emphasis on providing positive feedback to their staff. I don't know why, because God knows we're not paying them enough. And if this is what people want, it makes people feel valued, respected, and appreciated. As I said earlier when I prompted that question to all of you, why aren't we doing it more? Why is there reluctance? Are we afraid that we're going to tell people they're so good they're going to leave us? That's crazy thinking. So think about that. The manner in which we treat our staff will directly affect and impact the way they treat the individuals we support. So if they don't feel valued, appreciated, and respected by an agency, you think they're going to go into our residences and be superstars? Probably not. Probably not. They usually go hand in hand. Why don't we go to poll question number 3, Carla?
Okay, sounds great. Here it comes. The lack of providing positive praise, reinforcement, and incentives for our direct care support personnel continues to be, oh, I'm sorry, continues to be an issue, a problem?
Yes, you got it.
Okay, it looks like it may have gotten cut off
The
here.
question is, continues to be a major problem.
A major problem. Okay, so the lack of providing positive praise, reinforcement, and incentives for our direct care support personnel continues to be a major problem. True or false?
I'm looking for another 100% here. 99 won't do.
Get that, I know.
Unless somebody's going to play with me.
Everybody is getting their responses in pretty quickly, so we're going to give this another couple seconds here and then close this out. And okay, here we go. 100% has said true. Nobody said false. We're 2 for 2.
Fantastic. Any questions?
Yeah, we can do a few questions here. Yeah. All right. Simone has asked, how do you work towards encouraging that paradigm shift with staff? It's hard to teach staff how to see them as individuals that can, with proper support, as well as stopping with restrictions.
Yeah, it's for some staff, it's it's a tough hill to climb. I'm not going to lie. I have found, I'm just telling you in my own experience, I tend to really be able to influence the behavior of new staff. If I have staff that are coming in that are new to the field, I can mold them. I love that. It's like a ball of clay. I can kind of turn them into exactly what I want them to be. And PBS training is a big, big, big part of that. Where I tend to have more difficulty, and I'll bet you the person that asked the question can relate to this, is staff that have worked in the field for a very, very long time that are used to doing it the old way. And the old way was custodial care, right? What was the staff's responsibility back in the day? Make sure people had clean clothes, decent food, and a roof over their head. If you did that, nice job. You did your work for the day. Now that's a sham. If you think that's your job, then you don't understand what your job is, right? Because that's custodial care. That's crap. That's a given. That's you don't even have to talk about that. So it is a paradigm shift for some people. Most people are very willing to go there because, as I point out to them, if they truly embrace everything I'm talking about, guess what? If they give it a try, their job becomes easier. And not only does their job become easier, because people are doing more for themselves and they're having to do less for the people, it also tends to change the attitude set of not only the individual, but the staff. The atmosphere becomes more collegial. It becomes more empowering. People are in better moods because they feel like they're learning skills and actualizing some of the things that they're learning. It is a struggle for some staff, but in my agencies where I have the power, which in some I do and some I don't, when I get resistance to what we're talking about today, then I have to evaluate whether or not that's a staff person I'm going to keep, quite honestly. Long-winded answer to a very good question.
Want to take another one?
Yep.
Okay. Stephanie wants to know, how do you convince a parent of an adult with developmental disabilities to allow them to try routines on their own rather than taking over? For example, parents still doing most of activities of daily living.
Yeah, that's a problem. I try to bring the parents into a discussion, into a meeting, not to tell them they're doing anything wrong, but to educate the parents about PBS. I think a lot of this is about education. Parents who have had their children home for many years with disabilities before they gave them up to a state agency or a private funded agency to kind of carry the torch moving forward, it's kind of instinctively that's their child. They can't do certain things. So they're not coming at it from that perspective with any maliciousness. Quite the contrary. They're trying to be helpful. So I find educating the parents about what we're trying to do with their son or daughter in the environment that they're in now, and getting those parents, particularly people where I run into trouble sometime, is I'll get a person who's a superstar Monday through Friday, and then they go home for a weekend visit with their parents. And again, please don't take this personally, parents out there. They start doing everything for the person, starts reverting back to expecting everything to be done for them. And then they come back on Monday and they're like, hey, Kev, why are you making me do all this? My parents just did all this for me. So in the spirit of cohesiveness and having a comprehensive approach, I think educating the parents about the principles and practices of PBS and why this is the right thing to do can be very beneficial. I've had very few parents that after we went through this stuff were resistive to implementing it when their loved one went home for a visit. I'm going to move on. We'll hold the questions till the end.
Sounds good.
So again, I started out today talking about proactive prevention versus reactive responsive. Again, PBS focuses primarily on the prevention of problem behaviors before they occur, which is always where we want to be if possible. Some behaviors are going to occur. It's unavoidable. It's an act of God. We didn't see something happening in the environment that was the precipitant. We had no control over it. So then we have no choice but to deal with it more in a reactive response-based kind of situation. But those situations are few and far between if you really want to be honest about it. Know what the environmental triggers are for the supported person. What tends to set them off? We all have triggers. I know what mine are. one of my triggers is when since I usually go to the store every day and I live by myself and I don't buy groceries in bulk, I'll run into a store and I'll buy 2 or 3 things for that day. And then I'll try to get into the quick express line and it says 12 items or less. And there's someone in line ahead of me with 2 shopping carts full of stuff, groceries. And that's a trigger. I'm saying this jokingly, but there's some truth to this. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I got this. Can't you see the sign? So again, probably too personal, but it is a trigger. I don't go crazy or anything. I just want you to know it bugs me. Avoid those situations if possible, or fix the situation before a person encounters it. Direct care staff typically know the people best, use their knowledge, insight, and experience in dictating interventions and strategies that will assist the supported person. So as I've said in some of my other webinars, those of you that have come along, always embrace the knowledge of direct care staff that really know the folks better than we'll ever have the opportunity to know them, because we simply don't have the luxury, usually, of getting to spend that much quality time with them. Our observations and our meetings with folks are usually few and relatively fleeting. Prevention is always the best option, obviously. We all need coping mechanisms. Recognize when the supported person is beginning to show signs of being angry, upset, or frustrated. So it's amazing how many times when I really talk to staff and someone will have some kind of a behavioral outburst, some kind of physical aggression or property destruction. They ran out the front door and didn't know where the heck they were going. And what happens a lot of times is when I do an autopsy, because I like to do autopsies on these incidents, try to learn from them, right? Because there's usually something to be learned. So when I go to the staff that were on duty at the time, I'll go, so what happened beforehand? Usually the immediate answer is nothing. Everything was fine. I don't understand it. It just came out of the blue. It just happened. And then when we actually start to break it down, I realized that the staff actually were aware of some antecedents, as subtle as they may have been. And they may not have paid attention to them, and eventually it resulted in the behavior being exhibited that it was. So most people have idiosyncrasies, things that they engage in, that if you're acutely aware of the person and really know the individual, you're in tune with what they are, and you can intervene early in that chain of behavioral escalation potentially, rather than just sitting back and waiting for the volcano to erupt. At these initial signs, staff should intervene and propose alternative strategies to prevent further escalation. Don't wait until the volcano erupts. That's the example I just gave. Everyone benefits from developing coping mechanisms. These may include redirection to an alternative activity, deep breathing exercises, listening to relaxing music, going for a walk, discussing what is upsetting the supported person. There's dozens of coping mechanisms that are reasonable and effective and appropriate. We just need to figure out what they are and then teach people that these things are available to them so that they can pull themselves together when they're feeling upset, angry, stressed, anxious. And remember, if the person can't expressively communicate any of that, that's a problem because we don't know it until it happens. Reinforce praise, acknowledge the person for choosing an appropriate coping mechanism. Again, the focus is on prevention and intervening early in the chain of behavior, as it always should be. Last poll question of the day.
Last but not least, all right, here we go. The superior strategy is to wait until the person behaviorally blows up and then attempt to intervene and or diffuse the situation.
Okay, I'm predicting 100% on this one too.
Okay, let's see how we can do here. Hopefully we can be 3 for 3.
We should be 4 for 4, but I'll take 3 for 3.
All right, everybody's getting their answers in fairly quickly here, so we'll just give this another couple seconds. If you haven't already submitted an answer, please do so. And we'll go ahead and close this out. And here we go. Oh, 3% say true, 97% said false. Sorry.
Oh,
We were so
really?
close.
All right. Like you said in the beginning, accuracy in the responses isn't necessarily what we're looking for.
Exactly.
I just stressed a whole lot that we shouldn't be waiting for the volcano to erupt. So, all right, let's go to the last slide of the day. Any quick, do we have any one or two quick questions we can take before we move on?
Yeah, you're gonna let me try to determine what's quick and not?
Well, we'll take one or two questions because we're getting near the end, but this
Sure,
is the
sure.
last slide. So we're doing
This
okay.
kind of piggybacks on what we were talking about earlier too. So how do you persuade parents of adults to agree to developing communication for their non-speaking adult child?
How do you do it? By helping them understand as much as possible how imperative it is that their son or daughter is able to communicate on some level that we can generalize and maintain across environments. So if that's the goal, and I believe that always should be the goal, generalization and maintenance of behavior, isn't that one of the primary goals of behavior analysis? I think it is. At least that's what I remember from the white book back in the day. So that again, that should not be something that parents are or guardians are averse to. It's an education thing. And I'll give you an example. Do you know how many parents and guardians I deal with that when I propose that maybe their son or daughter should be on a particular psychotropic med because they have a legitimate DSM-5 psychiatric disorder, it's pretty obvious that they do. They clearly meet the criteria. I get a lot of pushback. What? I don't want them on meds. So a lot of this has to do with education, understanding, having some empathy, but being persistent that they must come along for this journey because the collective journey is going to work much better than if people are fragmented in our approaches. I'm going to cover this last slide, Carl, and then we have plenty of time for the questions at the end.
Okay, great.
Why do I mention restrictions again? If you were part of the human rights webinar last month, you probably say, I don't even want to hear the word again. Why? Because restrictions, if you think about it, is kind of like diametrically opposed to PBS. I talk about teaching, I talk about access, I talk about independence and autonomy, all of those wonderful things. If there's restrictions, well, how did those things happen? Well, they can't because the person is restricted from the ability to be able to engage in some of those things. So restrictions, as I've said before, do not teach individuals how to behave responsibly and appropriately. They typically simply deny access. Another problem with restrictions is that they affect or impact a person's housemates who may not need or benefit from the restriction, thereby negatively impacting their level of independence. So think about that. If I'm living with one person that legitimately needs some kind of a restriction, but that restriction impacts me in the spirit of PBS, that's a problem because it's limiting me. And I'm not even why you have the thing in place in the first place. So that's, just be aware of if you go down this road, which we should rarely go down, be aware of what you're doing and some of the pitfalls. You can see that the definition of restriction is diametrically opposed to allowing persons to be as independent and autonomous as they can be. Again, we've talked about this before, restraint should only be utilized on an emergency basis. I believe this very strongly. And when a true emergency exists, the general principle and philosophy is always use the least aversive, intrusive, restrictive interventions. If some type of restriction is requested or imposed, be prepared to demonstrate what you have done programmatically and clinically before you got to this point. And then it's just a quick overview of the day. Synopsis of main components of the PBS model include increased opportunities for choice making and establishing one's own daily routine. Critical. Increasing expressive communication. Can't let that one go. Better awareness of antecedents, precursors, and setting events. What are the triggers? What sets the person off? Can we avoid them? Can we modify the environment before those things occur to prevent the person from having a meltdown? Why wouldn't we do that if it's reasonable to do that? Be aware of other factors that directly impact behavioral presentation. Medical and health conditions, psychiatric disorders, trauma, that a person has experienced, which can have lifelong impact. Increase opportunities for persons to receive positive reinforcement in the form of verbal praise, recognition, and acknowledgement. We're a minute over. I can't believe it, but that wraps it up for today. Again, I reminded you in the beginning that some of this material today might not be new to you, but I find that I can deviate from some of these core main components, and I find it's therapeutic for me personally to always get back to my core, to my center. And my center is largely focused on the principles and practices of positive behavior support. So I want to thank you for attending today. I hope this has been helpful. I'm only here to try to be helpful. That's the only reason I do this. And just remind you that we have 3 other webinars as part of the series. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And I will stick around for as long as needed for questions and answers. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so yes, that concludes the hour for CEUs. You are welcome to stick around and stay for the question and answers. I know we have a bunch of questions that have come in throughout the presentation that I'll go through now. But in order, if you did pay for the CEUs and you have a prior engagement to go to, feel free. You have met the hourly requirement at the very least, and we will be back in touch with instructions on how to obtain that CEU credit. A few people just wanted to jump in and say this before we get to the questions. A few people have asked about a recording for today. The recording will become available. Give it about an hour or so after the webinar concludes, and then you can actually just use the same link you used to register to get access to the recording of today's webinar. You wouldn't be able to get the CEUs from watching the webinar, but you will see all the information. Okay, so let's get started. Just wanted to share that Margaret McGill did say that just wanted to share the platinum rule, which is treating people the way they want to be treated, applies to everything you are saying. So she wanted to thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Yes. And then, okay, Delia asks, why make a distinction between ABA and PBS? Everything that PBS seems to include is a part of ABA.
Not really. Let me give you an example. The PBS and ABA is very much overlapping. Unless I'm mistaken, and I might be, so some of you out there can educate me, please. Thoughts, feelings, and emotions from a strict behavioral analytic perspective weren't considered behaviors, but those are factors that we really consider in positive behavior supports as things that can impact a person's behavior. So thoughts, feelings, emotions, all can profoundly experience the way our people behave. Back when I took the behavior analytic coursework, we didn't really talk about that. Was where we made that overt versus covert distinction. I see tremendous parallels, as she does, between PBS and back again when I took the coursework, which was over a decade ago. Very little emphasis given to mental health issues and the impact that they directly have on behavior. I think that's the main focus area. So again, there are some distinctions between PBS and ABA, but as a general rule, I totally agree with her. The two are very much in alignment, which I think is a great thing. But there are a couple of subtle distinctions, I think. It's a good point.
Okay, great. Laura wants to know, how do you encourage staff to engage in more positive reinforcement?
By positively reinforcing staff, by what? How many agencies am I involved with that don't have an employee of the month, that don't have any kind of one? I have one agency that I used to work with that every month on their website, they would put up their PBS employee of the month. And then they would put in a picture of the employee, what the employee did that earned them that distinction. And there'd be a little tangible incentive for that person. I think it was a $50 gas card. I mean, nonprofits, we can't afford a lot, but we can afford something. So that's how we have to do it. The administration, the other thing I neglected to say, and it was a big oversight on my part, for PBS to be successful in any agency, it has to be embraced from the top down. You can't have direct care staff that believe in the principles and practices of PBS, but the administration doesn't. It doesn't work. It won't work. Been there, done that. It's a disaster. So whenever I get into the practices and principles of PBS in an agency that I'm affiliated with, there has to be an understanding going in. We're all buying into this because it works much more seamlessly.
Okay, let's see. Stephanie has asked, when you talk about language and how the term person with disability may be faded out over the next few years and replaced by something else, what do you think about the word client or individual? Should we stop using this term and use person supported, or is there anything else we can use?
I think person supported is better. Client I don't like because it implies, if you actually look up the definition, and I have, client I think implies usually, like if I go to a lawyer to represent me and I give him a retainer, then I become his client. It's like I'm paying for services or something. So it's the whole word client in that kind of relationship that historically it means. I think individual, I think is fine. I think supported person. I mean, again, I don't take offense to that today. Ask me 2 years from now. One of the, I'll just give a quick aside here because it really made an impact on me. It almost brought me to tears when it happened. I was once doing a PBS training in an agency and all the staff were brand new. And we were talking about, well, they weren't brand new. They'd worked for a couple of weeks. And I asked them, I said, so what do you think we should call the people that you work with? What do you think the proper name for them is? Because I wanted to hear what they had to say. And one of the women in the class, who was very, very new to the field, thought about it for a while. And I thought this is one of the most profound answers I've ever heard. I won't forget it. And I said, so what do you think? I think your name was Maribel or something. I said, what do you think, Maribel? What do you think we should call the people that we support? And she said, I think we should call them friends. I said, friends? How'd you come up with that? And she said, well, you know, I treat them like they're my friend. I talk to them like they're my friend. I share information with them like they're my friend, and they do the same with me. So I think friend, now I'm not advocating that we go out now and start a campaign to change the label to friend, but that really made an impact on me because I think